Hey Altenew friends, it's Jaycee for a crafty perfect pairing. The most common question I'm asked on the gram or my blog is how to make a masculine card. With Father's Day just a few weeks away in the United States, let's take a look at 3 easy card examples for the guys. When I'm asked how to make masculine cards, I interpret that in a few ways. One of the questions I feel I'm really asked is how do I use my current feminine topic stamp sets to make more masculine cards? Another is how do I make a card my male recipient will enjoy? And lastly, how do I make a card for a guy without so much black ink? I will dive into all of these questions with these next 3 cards, and I'm confident you will have great substitutes in your crafty stash to help make these cards for yourself to share. To start, I'm going to use tie-dye motifs. I love this really simple tie-dye look to these images that are going to be really easy to align, even if you don't have a stamp positioning tool. Now, in the trifold for perfect pairing, I'm going to follow something similar to this card example that you find in your product trifold, but then I'm going to amp up my background that I think will complement these series of images. I'm going to start with a panel of white cardstock in my stamp positioning tool, and then I'm going to align this simple motif in the center of my cardstock. To stamp this image, I'm going to use jet black crisp ink. And as I'm stamping these images, I'm not looking for perfection because these images are supposed to be really easy to line up. So I'm keeping the spacing within these images as similar as I can. So that is that layer done using the thicker images in the stamp sets. I'll move on to these shorter bold lines to stamp in between these layers. And then finally, I will move on to the thinner line images, again, stamping in jet black crisp ink. Now my background isn't perfect, and I'll just find ways to fill in all the spaces in here. So I'll just use the thinner image and stamp it again on this empty space. My philosophy with backgrounds has always been why work so hard if they're just going to go in the back. So in this case, I'm really not looking for perfection here. Here's my finished background panel. Now I realize not everybody has access to the jet black ink spray like I do, but another alternative is to use your ink pad. And this is the same ink pad I was using earlier. And diluting back the ink onto an acrylic block with just a little bit of clean water and a fine tipped water brush. Now I have one dedicated to just black ink, but these water brushes usually come with your Altenew watercolor pan sets, or you can buy them standalone. Either way, all of these materials are going to be linked in the description box. And all I'm going to do is add an array of black splatters, and this is going to help any sort of imperfections that I have in my background and give it more of that abstract fabric feel that is so characteristic of tie-dye. So I'm going to let this background piece dry back a little bit, and in the meantime I'll work on the next element and the pairing that I decided to pair with tie-dye motifs. Now the images in tie-dye motifs are fairly irregular, and by adding in the splatter we've created more of an amorphous feel. And just because they're masculine cards doesn't mean they can't have any sort of sense of balance. So by using geometric landscapes, I'll help anchor the amorphous shapes with some of these harsh lines. And of course, I find the sentiments in this stamp set to be very gender neutral, especially anything that says for you. I like to use for you sentiments for more masculine cards. And again, to keep these cards really simple, all I'm going to do is grab a piece of vellum for this next piece. This background stamp is going to cover an A2 size panel of vellum or cardstock. So I used a rolled up piece of tape to hold down my vellum. And after using a sticky embossing ink, I'm going to heat emboss this panel with platinum crisp embossing powder from Altenew. And once this is heat set, I will cut it down to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. And I will overlay the trim down panel on top of my abstract tie-dye motif background. My Water Garden Altenew artist markers happen to be within reach, so I will use the darkest color in Galactic Stream to just add streaks of color through the back of this vellum panel. Now for masculine card sentiments, I like to keep it really simple. And like I mentioned earlier, I think the sentiments in geometric landscapes happen to be one of the better ones for gender neutral cards. It's a very simple font and it's large enough to cover and be a focal point on your masculine cards. So either one of these work, but I happen to be needing happy birthday cards for my coworkers, especially for the fellas, so I will probably just use this happy birthday sentiment, but I'll show you a way to sort of amp up these sentiment strips so that they look a little bit more masculine. In my scrap drawer, I'm just using a piece of white cardstock, and I'm going to stamp the happy birthday sentiment onto it. And then I will cut the sentiment in sort of this parallelogram shape. Then on a piece of scrap black cardstock, I'm going to trace the outline of this sentiment banner I just created and cut out the exact shape I created with this sentiment banner. Now with my two pieces, I will gently offset and create a sort of drop shadow for this banner and glue these two pieces together so that I have a drop shadow happy birthday banner. So here are the three elements to my card, and now I can start assembling it. First, I'm going to glue down my background panel to my pre-folded note card base. Then on my colored vellum panel that is also heat embossed, I will foam mount my happy birthday banner using the Altenew Instant Dimension foam tape. And then I will apply my liquid adhesive where I have laid down the Instant Dimension foam tape. And by applying glue behind focal elements like my happy birthday sentiment strip, I can discreetly hide my adhesive. And with that, that finishes my first card. This is more of a geometric, sort of interesting background, happy birthday masculine card with a splash of color in the center. For this next card, I'm also going to create a really interesting background, but this time I'm going to utilize your sentiment stamps. Mega Label Love is a play on the well-loved Label Love stamp set from Altenew, and it's another wonderful sentiment stamp set that is truly versatile. So for this first card project, I'm going to use the Happy sentiment of Mega Label Love and a piece of craft cardstock. I'm going to use jet black crisp ink and an acrylic block to stamp a repeat background that is sort of off-kilter. Now, like I said, this doesn't have to be perfect, but if you just have to have it that way, you can use a ruler as sort of a guide to at least get these lines fairly straight. Now my crafting surface happens to also be my filming surface, so I am going to try to keep this clean by laying down my silicone stamping mat. My acrylic block happens to have these lines on them, these etched grid lines, so I can use those grid lines to help not only space my stamps, but also as a ruler to help align the next row of sentiment strips. Now, I thought I was going to do the full panel, but I'm actually just going to leave it at this 2/3 sort of look. On another piece of craft cardstock, I'll use ruby red crisp ink to stamp the For You sentiment from Mega Label Love. Now, before I cut out the ruby red label from the craft cardstock, another tip for you for creating masculine cards if all you have are floral stamps is to just use the leaves. I'm using Tranquility Rose floral stamp set, and I'm going to embellish this card and again create the sense of balance by adding in these amorphous leaves to sort of frame the For You embossed label. I will cut out this Mega Label Love For You red embossed label and die cut these leaf images with the coordinating dies for Tranquility Rose die set. So here are my 3 die cut elements using Tranquility Rose leaves, and also my red embossed label sentiment from Mega Label Love. I will set all of these aside for a moment and bring back my background panel. Now I did add another row of the Happy label stamps to my craft cardstock, and I'm going to do a little bit of distressing on this bottom edge here. The way I'm going to do that is by using my large ink blending tool from Altenew, and I'm going to add just a touch of jet black to the bottom of this panel. So that's my somewhat distressed background panel. Now I think black and white happen to look really great on craft cardstock, so I'm going to add white splatters with pure white ink spray directly onto this background panel. And just like the previous card, I'm using a dedicated watercoloring water brush to add my white splatters onto my background panel. Once that dries back, I will glue that background panel to my notes card base. Now before I glue down all the elements on my card base, I'm going to add some little details to these leaf images. To do so, I'm going to use the fine liner pen set from Altenew and add in these hash details in areas where I think there are shadows. And the wonderful thing with these sort of hash sketch details is they don't have to be perfect because they're made to look more like sketchy lines. I've glued the foreground element together, but what I'm going to do is foam mount this entire foreground piece. And again, I'll use that instant dimension foam tape to easily raise up and adhere my foreground element to my background piece. And because I can't help myself, I had to add black splatters as well to help enforce that vintage and sort of grungy look to this card. My next card is going to be a little bit on the darker side, but I like the modern interpretation of using some of these critter stamps paired with something a little bit witchy and a little bit of a surreal landscape. So to start, I'm going to use the Mini Moon stamp set, and I'll be using this image right here. And it should come to no surprise by now that I'm going to use jet black crisp ink. And the reason why I keep choosing black inks in particular is because I know they're readily accessible for most of you. And I don't want making a masculine card to be sort of a burden, so I'm picking products that are going to be similar and readily accessible in your card making stash, possibly. So what I want on my card background here is a progression of moon phases running along the central axis of my red cardstock. Now you won't see this most central moon, but I'm using it as a starting point to make sure that I just have the alignment roughly correct. I'm going to shift my cardstock up and then gently align and make sure that my next moon phase is not going to completely overshadow the full moon here. And without cleaning my stamp, I'm going to ink up the majority of this stamp, at least the bottom 2/3. And then I'm going to use a paper towel and diffuse that layer of ink. In essence, I'm trying to create the illusion of a gibbous moon, and then I will stamp that image. And then after I've stamped that image, I will move my cardstock up so that I get a further down image. Check my stamp alignment and ink up a crescent shape to my moon stamp. I'll have my cardstock hang off my stamp positioning tool a little bit just so I can get this last image stamped right at the edge of my background piece. I'm stamping the very perimeter of my moon stamp, diffusing the ink and stamping that very thin crescent on the bottom of my cardstock. And then lastly, I will stamp a crescent-shaped image at the top of my cardstock. On a scrap panel of the same red cardstock, I'll use this largest image from Dovetail Butterfly's layering stamp set. And then I will simply stamp this detail image in jet black crisp ink. This image does have the coordinating die, so I will use it to cut out the stamped image. Here's the overall plan for what the card is going to look like. But to help break up some of this symmetry, of course, I find the best solution to any card, regardless of the gender, is going to be some splatter. I have a rough idea of where I want my sentiment, so I'm just going to use something to mask off that area. And once that dries, I'll stamp my sentiment directly to the background. Now, I'm not going to use the entire sentiment, I love you to the moon and back, from Mini Moon stamp set. Instead, I'm just going to stamp I love you. I'm going to use a piece of washi tape to mask off the other area of the stamp that I don't want. Ink up the stamp using jet black crisp ink. Remove the washi tape and stamp the small understated sentiments directly on my background. Now, those are all the elements I'll have on this card. To finish this card off, I'll glue my background panel with my moon phases directly onto my note card base. And just as before, I'll use the Instant Dimension foam tape to raise up the dovetail butterfly image on my note card. And that finishes my last masculine card, featuring this really interesting and abstract scene. If you want to, you can make this one layer by masking the dovetail butterfly and stamping your moon phases directly over it. Just as a recap, this Perfect Pairings episode features ideas on getting the most out of your Altenew stash for masculine cards. If you've seen something you like in this video, make sure to check the description box for links to the crafty essentials at the Altenew shop. My Perfect Pairings episodes are video tutorials aimed at getting you to rekindle your love for your older Altenew favorites. They air every second and fourth Sunday, so make sure you subscribe and ring the notification bell so you don't miss an episode. Thank you so much for tuning into this Perfect Pairings with me, and I'll see you in the next one.
Hello crafters, Jen here. For more tips, techniques, tutorials, and to discover which paper crafting products are right for you, subscribe to Altenew's YouTube channel. Make sure to hit the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Thanks for watching.